Why did my stepmom refuse to let anyone call 911 while I was literally dying? The first sign something was wrong came during Thanksgiving dinner when my vision started blurring at the edges. I blinked hard, trying to clear it, but the white spots dancing across my sight only got worse. Dad was carving turkey, while Vivian, his wife of 8 months, arranged her perfect tablescape for the third time that day. She'd spent weeks planning this dinner to impress Dad's business partners, the Kramers, who owned half the commercial real estate in our county. My fork clattered to the plate as a sharp pain shot through my chest. The sound made everyone look up from their conversations about quarterly projections and holiday vacation plans. Vivian's perfectly glossed smile faltered for just a second before snapping back into place. She'd warned me earlier that any disruption today would have serious consequences, and her eyes now carried that familiar threat. The pain intensified, spreading from my chest down my left arm in waves that made me gasp. I tried to speak, to tell Dad something was wrong, but my tongue felt thick and unresponsive. Mrs. Kramer was describing their new yacht when I slumped forward, my water glass tumbling to the hardwood floor with a crash that echoed through the dining room. Vivian stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. She rushed to my side, but instead of checking on me, she grabbed my shoulders and forced me upright in my seat. Her manicured nails dug into my skin as she whispered harshly in my ear that I was embarrassing the family and needed to pull myself together immediately. The room started spinning as more pain exploded across my chest. I could hear Dad asking what was wrong, his voice seeming to come from very far away. Vivian's response was smooth and controlled, explaining that I'd been feeling under the weather all day and was probably just having an anxiety attack from being around new people. Mrs. Kramer suggested maybe I should lie down, her voice kind but distant through the ringing in my ears. Vivian agreed immediately, saying she'd take me upstairs to rest and that everyone should continue enjoying dinner. She gripped my arm and hauled me to my feet, supporting my weight while maintaining her hostess smile. In the hallway, away from the guests, her mask dropped completely. She shoved me against the wall and hissed that I was ruining the most important dinner of her social climbing career. The Kramers controlled Dad's biggest contracts, and impressing them tonight could secure our family's financial future. My little dramatic episode was going to cost us everything. The pain was getting worse, radiating up into my jaw now, but when I tried to explain that something was seriously wrong, Vivienne cut me off. She said I was clearly having a panic attack brought on by teenage hormones and attention-seeking behavior. She'd seen this exact performance from her sister's daughter, and she wouldn't let me manipulate the situation. She dragged me up the stairs to my bedroom, my legs barely able to support my weight. The walls seemed to be closing in, and I could taste metal in my mouth. When I collapsed on my bed, she stood over me with her arms crossed, checking her watch and calculating how long she could be away from her guests without seeming rude. I managed to whisper that I needed help, that something was really wrong with my heart, but Vivian laughed coldly. She said 17-year-olds don't have heart attacks, and I was clearly trying to steal attention from her perfect evening. She'd worked too hard organizing this dinner to let me sabotage it with teenage theatrics. The chest pain was becoming unbearable, like someone was sitting on my ribs while squeezing my heart in a vice. I tried to sit up, to make her understand how serious this was, but the movement sent lightning bolts of agony through my entire torso. I fell back against the pillows, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Vivian checked her reflection in my dresser mirror, smoothing her hair and reapplying lipstick. She told me to stay in my room for the rest of the evening and to not come downstairs until the guests left. If I made any noise or caused any more disruptions, there would be severe consequences that would affect my college fund and living arrangements. After she left, I lay in the dark trying to breathe through the crushing pain in my chest. I could hear laughter and conversation from downstairs, the clink of glasses and silverware, the normal sounds of a successful dinner party. Every breath felt like inhaling fire, and my left arm had gone completely numb from the shoulder down. I reached for my phone to call Dad, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. When I managed to dial his number, it went straight to voicemail. He always silenced his phone during business dinners, a rule Vivian had insisted on to show proper respect for their guests and undivided attention to important conversations. The pain was spreading now, creeping up my neck and down my back in waves that left me dizzy and nauseous. I tried calling my mom, who lived across town with her new husband, but she didn't answer either. It was her book club night, and she never took calls during her weekly wine and literature discussions. I considered calling 911 myself, but Vivian's threats echoed in my head. She'd made it clear that any drama tonight would result in serious consequences, and she had ways of making my life miserable that Dad never saw. She controlled our household finances, my college savings account, and had already threatened to send me to boarding school if I didn't learn to respect her authority. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made me hope Dad was coming to check on me, but it was Vivian returning with a glass of water and 2 pills. She said they were Tylenol for my headache, and that I needed to take them immediately. The pills looked different from the usual over-the-counter medication, but when I hesitated, she grabbed my jaw and forced my mouth open. She poured the water down my throat while holding the pills against my tongue until I swallowed. The taste was bitter and chalky, Nothing like regular Tylenol. Within minutes, the room became even more blurry, and my thoughts started feeling fuzzy and disconnected. Whatever she'd given me was making everything worse. I tried to tell her the pills weren't helping, that the pain was getting worse, but my words came out slurred and wrong. Vivienne nodded approvingly and said the medication would help me sleep through my little episode. She adjusted my blankets and turned off the light, leaving me alone in the darkness with my racing heart and crushing chest pain. The dinner party continued downstairs, growing louder as the wine flowed and business deals were discussed. I could hear Dad's laugh and Vivienne's tinkling giggle, the sound of success and social advancement happening just below, while I struggled to breathe in my bedroom. The irony wasn't lost on me that my potential death was being ignored for the sake of impressing people. Time became elastic, as whatever drug Vivienne had given me took stronger effect. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain in my chest constant, but somehow more distant. During lucid moments, I tried again to call for help, but my phone seemed impossibly heavy, and my fingers wouldn't work properly to dial numbers. At some point, I heard the guests leaving, their voices carrying up through my bedroom window as they said goodbyes in the driveway. Mr. Kramer was praising Vivienne's hosting skills, while his wife complimented the menu and table setting. Dad's voice was warm and grateful as he thanked them for coming and mentioned upcoming business opportunities. The front door closed, and I heard Dad and Vivienne cleaning up downstairs. She was excitedly recounting the evening's successes, how impressed the Kramers seemed, and how this dinner might lead to bigger contracts and social opportunities. Dad was praising her organizational skills and thanking her for making such a good impression on his most important clients. Nobody came to check on me. The house grew quiet as they went to bed, satisfied with their successful evening. I lay in the dark, my chest feeling like it was being crushed by invisible hands, wondering if I would die alone in my room while my family slept peacefully below, completely unaware of my suffering. The night stretched endlessly as I fought to stay conscious. The medication made everything feel dreamlike and surreal, but the pain remained sharp and real. I managed to text my best friend, Kyle, but my message came out as gibberish, autocorrect, unable to make sense of my drug-addled attempts at communication. He texted back, asking if I was drunk. Morning brought no relief. If anything, the pain had intensified overnight, and now I was having trouble keeping my eyes open. Vivienne appeared in my doorway around 10, already dressed and made up for her weekly tennis lesson. She asked if I was feeling better, her tone suggesting I'd better say yes. When I tried to explain that the pain was worse, and I thought I needed to see a doctor, she cut me off impatiently. She said I'd clearly worked myself into a state over nothing, and a day of rest would cure whatever psychosomatic symptoms I was experiencing. She had plans that couldn't be canceled, and she wasn't about to waste her Saturday in a hospital emergency room over teenage drama. She brought me more of the same pills, insisting they would help with my anxiety and pain. When I refused to take them, she became threatening, reminding me of her power over my college fund and living arrangements. She said if I couldn't learn to handle minor stress without creating family emergencies, maybe I wasn't mature enough to live at home. The pills made everything worse, but also made me too drowsy to fight back effectively. I spent the day drifting in and out of consciousness, while Vivienne went about her normal weekend activities. She played tennis, went shopping, had lunch with her girlfriends, all while I lay upstairs potentially dying from whatever was wrong with my heart. Dad was at his golf tournament, an annual event he'd been planning to attend for months. Vivienne had encouraged him to go, saying I was fine and just needed rest. She'd handle everything at home and he should focus on his important recreational networking. The tournament was invitation only, filled with potential business connections and clients. By Saturday evening, I was having trouble staying awake for more than a few minutes at a time. The chest pain had become a constant crushing pressure, and I was starting to have trouble breathing even while lying still. When Vivienne checked on me, she seemed annoyed that I wasn't better yet and threatened to call a psychiatrist if this continued. She said she'd done research online and was convinced I was having an extended panic attack brought on by school stress and family changes. She'd made an appointment with a therapist for next week, and until then, I needed to stop being dramatic and let the medication do its work. She had Sunday brunch plans that she wouldn't cancel over my attention-seeking behavior. That night, I woke up unable to breathe properly. My chest felt like it was being compressed in a vice, and there was a sharp, stabbing pain under my ribs that made me cry out. I tried to call for help, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. The pills had left me too weak to even sit up properly. I managed to knock my water glass off the nightstand, hoping the crash would wake someone. Instead, I heard Vivienne's angry footsteps on the stairs, and she burst into my room furious about being woken up. She saw the broken glass and accused me of throwing a tantrum, threatening to make me pay for replacement and clean up the mess myself. When she saw me struggling to breathe, she rolled her eyes and said I was obviously hyperventilating from anxiety. She grabbed a paper bag from the wastebasket and shoved it over my mouth, telling me to breathe slowly and stop being hysterical. The bag made breathing even harder, and I panicked, clawing at it until she pulled it away. She sat on my bed and delivered a lecture about manipulation and attention-seeking behavior. She said she'd seen this exact performance from troubled teenagers before and she wouldn't be fooled by fake medical emergencies. If I thought I could control the household by pretending to be sick, I was seriously mistaken about who had the power in this family. The pain was becoming unbearable, radiating from my chest into my back and shoulders. I begged her to call Dad, to let me go to the hospital, to please believe that something was seriously wrong. She shook her head and said I was clearly having some kind of psychological episode that required professional help, not emergency medical treatment. She forced 2 more pills down my throat and said she was calling a psychiatric facility in the morning. She'd found a place that specialized in troubled teenagers who created drama to manipulate their families. A few days in a controlled environment would cure me of this attention-seeking behavior and teach me respect for family harmony. Sunday morning brought Dad home from his golf tournament, excited about new business connections and potential contracts. I heard him and Vivian talking in the kitchen, her voice low and concerned as she explained my condition. She told him I'd been having panic attacks and delusional episodes, possibly triggered by school pressure and adjustment issues. Dad's footsteps on the stairs gave me hope that finally someone would see how sick I really was. When he entered my room, I tried to sit up, to show him the chest pain and breathing problems. But the movement sent such intense pain through my torso that I collapsed back, gasping and crying. His face showed concern, but Vivienne was right behind him, explaining that this was exactly the kind of dramatic behavior she'd been dealing with all weekend. She said I'd been refusing medication and making increasingly wild claims about heart problems and dying, clearly seeking attention and trying to disrupt the family's peaceful weekend activities. Dad felt my forehead for fever and asked basic questions about how I was feeling. When I tried to describe the chest pain and difficulty breathing, Vivian interrupted to say I'd been hyperventilating and having anxiety attacks. She showed him the research she'd printed about teenage panic disorders and the psychiatric facility she'd found. The facility's brochure described their success treating adolescents who used fake medical emergencies to manipulate their families. They specialized in breaking these destructive behavior patterns through structured therapy and controlled environments. Dad looked at the materials and nodded approvingly, saying it sounded like exactly what I needed. I begged him to take me to a real hospital first, to let a doctor examine me before assuming this was psychological. The desperation in my voice must have reached him because he hesitated, looking between me and Vivian with uncertainty. For a moment, I thought he might override her and get me proper medical attention. But Vivian was persuasive, reminding him of the successful dinner party and how my episode had nearly ruined their relationship with the Kramers. She said giving in to my manipulation now would only encourage more dramatic behavior in the future. The psychiatric facility could evaluate my physical symptoms while addressing the underlying psychological issues. Dad agreed to call the facility, but they were closed on Sundays. Vivian suggested we wait until Monday for a proper intake appointment, and in the meantime, keep me medicated and comfortable. She assured him that panic attacks, while scary, weren't actually dangerous, and a day or two wouldn't make any difference in my treatment. That afternoon, while Dad was at his office catching up on weekend emails, my condition deteriorated dramatically. The chest pain became excruciating, and I started having episodes where I couldn't breathe at all. My lips were turning blue, and I was making gasping sounds that should have alarmed anyone with basic medical knowledge. Vivian found me during one of these episodes and became furious, accusing me of putting on an increasingly elaborate performance. She said the blue lips were obviously makeup, and the breathing problems were clearly voluntary hyperventilation designed to scare Dad into giving me what I wanted. She threatened to tie me down if I didn't stop the theatrics immediately. When I collapsed on the floor during an attempt to get to the bathroom, she stood over me with her arms crossed, waiting for me to admit I was faking. The tile floor was cold against my cheek, and I could barely keep my eyes open. Everything was getting darker around the edges, like someone was slowly dimming the lights. She dragged me back to bed and gave me more pills, saying she was tired of this performance and it needed to stop before Dad came home. She threatened to call the psychiatric facility's emergency line and have me committed immediately if I didn't start behaving rationally. The threat terrified me more than the physical pain. By evening, I was barely conscious. The room kept spinning even when I closed my eyes, and the chest pain had spread to encompass my entire torso. I couldn't feel my left arm at all, and my right hand was too weak to even hold my phone. I tried to call out, but no sound came from my throat. Dad returned home to find Vivienne preparing dinner as if everything was normal. She reported that I'd been sleeping most of the day and seemed calmer, though still claiming to have various phantom symptoms. She'd made the psychiatric facility appointment for first thing Monday morning, and they'd agreed to do a full evaluation, including any necessary medical tests. He came to check on me one more time, and I used every ounce of remaining strength to grab his hand and whisper that I was dying. The words came out slurred and barely audible, but I saw recognition in his eyes for the first time. He started to say we should go to the hospital, but Vivian appeared in the doorway. She reminded him that the psychiatric facility had warned against giving in to dramatic claims, as it would only reinforce the manipulative behavior. She said my grip on his hand was obviously calculated to seem weak and desperate, and my slurred speech was clearly an attempt to simulate serious illness. The professionals would know how to handle these tactics. Dad looked torn, Wanting to believe his wife but also seeing his child in obvious distress, Vivienne pressed her advantage, pointing out that if I was really having a medical emergency, I wouldn't be able to plan such coherent manipulation. Real heart attacks happened suddenly, not over 3 days with perfectly timed dramatic episodes. She convinced him to wait for the morning appointment, promising that trained professionals would sort out what was real versus what was performance. In the meantime, she'd monitor me closely and call 911 if any genuinely dangerous symptoms developed. Her confident medical knowledge and reasonable tone persuaded him to trust her judgment over my desperate pleas. That night, I knew I was going to die. The chest pain had become a crushing weight that made each breath a monumental effort. My heart was racing and skipping beats, creating an irregular rhythm that felt like my chest was being punched from the inside. I'd stopped being able to move my left arm entirely, and numbness was creeping up my neck. I tried one last time to call for help, but my phone was dead and I couldn't reach the charger. Even if I could have called 911, I was too weak to speak loud enough for them to hear me. I lay in the darkness listening to Dad and Vivienne talking quietly downstairs, their voices calm and domestic as I prepared to die alone. The house went quiet around midnight as they went to bed. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain becoming more distant as my body shut down. I thought about all the things I'd never get to do, all the people I'd never see again, all the experiences that would die with me because my stepmother couldn't admit she'd been wrong. Sometime before dawn, I heard footsteps in the hallway. For a moment, I hoped someone was finally coming to help, but the sounds passed by my door without stopping. It was just Dad getting ready for his early morning jog, part of his normal routine that would continue unchanged even as his son died upstairs. The irony was overwhelming. I was dying not from some rare disease or tragic accident, but from a common heart condition that could have been easily treated if anyone had taken my symptoms seriously. Instead, I was going to become a statistic, another teenager whose medical emergency was dismissed as attention-seeking behavior. As consciousness faded for what I thought would be the final time, I heard the front door open and close as Dad left for his run. The house was completely quiet now, just Vivienne sleeping peacefully while I slipped away in the room above her. She'd successfully eliminated the stepchild, who threatened her perfect life with my father. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my window and the sound of sirens in the distance. For a moment, I thought I might have died, and this was some kind of afterlife, but the familiar pain in my chest confirmed I was still alive. The sirens were getting closer, and I heard vehicles stopping in our driveway. Vivienne's voice was sharp with panic as she answered the front door. Multiple voices were talking at once, authoritative and urgent. I heard someone mention a wellness check and emergency medical evaluation. Dad's voice joined the conversation, confused and defensive, asking what was going on and why police were at his house. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs, and suddenly my room was full of paramedics and police officers. A woman in a uniform knelt beside my bed, checking my pulse and asking my name. Her touch was gentle but professional, and when I tried to answer, she told me to save my strength and just nod or shake my head. She was hooking me up to some kind of monitor when a paramedic announced my heart rate was dangerously irregular and my blood pressure was critically low. Someone called for an immediate transport to the cardiac unit, and suddenly everyone was moving with urgent efficiency. They loaded me onto a stretcher while asking rapid-fire questions about my symptoms and medical history. Vivienne was in the hallway, her face pale and her voice shaking as she tried to explain to a police officer that I'd been having panic attacks and they were taking me to a psychiatric facility this morning. The officer's expression was skeptical as he wrote in his notebook, especially when the paramedics announced they were detecting signs of cardiac distress. In the ambulance, a paramedic started an IV, while another took my blood pressure again. She said my numbers were consistent with heart failure, not anxiety, and asked how long I'd been experiencing chest pain. When I whispered that it had been 3 days, she exchanged a look with her partner that conveyed both anger and professional concern. The hospital emergency room erupted into controlled chaos when we arrived. A team of doctors and nurses surrounded my stretcher, connecting monitors and drawing blood while firing questions at the paramedics. Someone mentioned calling cardiology stat, and I heard medical terms I didn't understand being thrown around with increasing urgency. A doctor introduced herself as Dr. Rivera and explained they were going to run several tests to determine what was wrong with my heart. She asked about my symptoms and timeline, and when I described the 3-day progression, her jaw tightened visibly. She said those symptoms should have brought me to the emergency room immediately, not kept at home with anxiety medication. The tests revealed that I was in the middle of a massive heart attack caused by a rare genetic condition that blocks arteries in young people. Dr. Rivera explained that my heart muscle was dying from lack of blood flow, and without immediate surgery, I would have been dead within hours. The 3-day delay had caused permanent damage that could have been prevented. Dad arrived at the hospital looking shell-shocked, followed by Vivienne, who was frantically trying to explain to anyone who would listen that I'd seemed fine and was just having anxiety attacks. The police officer who had responded to the wellness check was taking notes and asking pointed questions about why medical care had been delayed. Dr. Rivera took Dad aside and showed him my test results, explaining in clinical terms how close I'd come to dying and how the delay in treatment had caused irreversible heart damage. She said someone my age should have been brought to the emergency room at the first sign of chest pain, not kept home and medicated for panic attacks. While they prepared me for emergency surgery, I learned that Kyle had been the one to call for the wellness check. He'd been worried about my strange texts and had tried calling multiple times without getting an answer. When he drove by the house and saw my bedroom light on for 3 straight days, he'd convinced his father to call the police. The surgery took 6 hours to clear the blocked arteries and repair the damage to my heart muscle. When I woke up in the cardiac ICU, Dad was sitting beside my bed with tears in his eyes. He said he was sorry, that he should have trusted his instincts and taken me to the hospital, that he'd let Vivian's confidence override his parental judgment. A social worker named Mrs. Chen visited to ask about my home situation and why medical care had been delayed. I told her everything about Vivian's threats, the forced medication, and her determination to maintain her perfect social image regardless of my health. Mrs. Chen documented every detail and said Child Protective Services would be investigating. The cardiologist explained that I would need extensive follow-up care and lifestyle modifications for the rest of my life. The delay in treatment had caused scarring in my heart muscle that would affect my ability to exercise and might require future surgeries. What should have been a completely treatable condition had become a chronic disability. Vivian was arrested 2 days later for child endangerment and practicing medicine without a license. The pills she'd been giving me were prescription sedatives that she'd obtained illegally, designed to keep me quiet and compliant while I suffered what she knew was a medical emergency. Her internet search history revealed she'd researched heart attack symptoms in teenagers. The police investigation revealed that Vivian had a pattern of denying medical care to control family members. Her previous husband had divorced her after she'd delayed calling an ambulance when their daughter had appendicitis, claiming it was just stomach flu until the appendix burst and caused life-threatening complications. Dad filed for divorce immediately and pressed charges for attempted murder. The evidence showed that Vivian had knowingly let me suffer a heart attack because she feared it would damage her social standing with the Kramers. Her text messages to friends revealed her frustration with my inconvenient timing and determination to handle things quietly. The trial made national news as an example of how social pressure and image maintenance can override basic human decency. Vivian received 15 years for attempted murder and child endangerment. The judge said her calculated cruelty and complete disregard for a child's life represented the worst aspects of narcissistic abuse hidden behind suburban respectability. Kyle was awarded a Citizen's Medal for his persistent concern that saved my life. His refusal to accept my strange behavior and his decision to involve authorities when he couldn't reach me directly prevented my death. He said later that something in my garbled texts had convinced him I was in real danger, not just having typical teenage drama. I spent my 18th birthday in cardiac rehabilitation, learning to live with a damaged heart and the knowledge that my stepmother had been willing to let me die rather than miss a social opportunity. The physical recovery was challenging, but the emotional healing of understanding that some people truly have no empathy took much longer. Dad and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, with the help of family counseling. He carried tremendous guilt about trusting Vivian over his own child, but he also had to live with the knowledge that his desire for social success had made him vulnerable to someone who saw me as an obstacle to be eliminated rather than a child to be protected. The Kramers, ironically, became some of my strongest supporters after learning what had happened. They funded a foundation for teen heart health awareness and said they were horrified that their business relationship had been used as justification for denying medical care to a dying child. They'd never asked anyone to prioritize social events over family emergencies. 2 years later, I testified before Congress about the dangers of dismissing teenage medical complaints as attention-seeking behavior. My case became part of legislation, requiring mandatory reporting when minors are denied emergency medical care, and training for educators to recognize the signs of medical neglect disguised as discipline. Vivian died in prison during her 3rd year of incarceration, killed by another inmate who learned about her crimes against children. The news brought me no satisfaction, only a sense of closure that justice had been served in its own way. Her death couldn't repair my heart, but it ensured she would never again prioritize her image over a child's life. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.